Wonderful. Oh, thank you so much. You should wait until the end of the talk to hear if it's going to be any good or not. You should never clap at the very beginning. I think you'll get a big kick out of this talk. Because how many of you in here are Java developers? I know, silly question, isn't it? Yeah. Node.js in the last session was interesting to a lot of people because they said, all right, I'm a Java developer. What's going on with this Node.js stuff? If you think of it as a competitor to the JDK, you're like, oh, okay, now I understand. I have a way that I can differentiate between when I'm going to use the JDK and when I'm going to use Node.js. A lot of questions I get are, when am I going to start using Node.js? And the answer I always give is, if you like the idea of running JavaScript on the client and JavaScript on the server and JavaScript in your NoSQL database, if you like the idea of having JavaScript all the way around, that's a good excuse to start playing around with Node.js. But what you have to realize is me suggesting that means that I am squeezing Java out of the equation. And that can be a hard sell, especially to an organization that is founded or predicated on Java development, which is what makes Ringo.js so interesting. You're going to get the spirit of Node.js. It's going to be very simple, is something that runs on the JDK. And that something, you can tell by the file extension, is JavaScript. So I think you might get some fun out of this, seeing what it's like running JavaScript through Java. Now, this is my background. I've told you more about myself than you ever wanted to know about, but my background really is, I still consider myself primarily a Java developer. And so that's why this talk was especially interesting to me, because I love being a Java developer and mixing it in with Groovy. Or being a Java developer and mixing it in with Jython. Or in this case, being a Java developer and mixing it in with JavaScript. Because the things I'm going to show you here aren't going to replace your current system. They're going to enhance your current system. So what do you think? Should we get started? Yeah, all right. Let's do this. So if you go to Ringo.js.org, this is the home page, you'll be greeted with this. Ringo is a CommonJS-based JavaScript runtime written in Java and based on the Mozilla JavaScript engine. Whew. That's a lot to take in, isn't it? So let's try to break this down. Ringo is a CommonJS-based server. CommonJS, what Node.js uses. So CommonJS, come on, there we go. All right. CommonJS started life as a project called Servlets. And the whole point of Servlets was to specify a whole ecosystem, more correctly, a whole set of modules, a whole set of packages, to be run outside of the browser. And once you're running outside of the browser, you can start doing interesting things like getting at the file system, or getting at the operating system, or getting at a bunch of things like that. So CommonJS started life as a way of getting JavaScript outside of the browser. Now, they moved it from Servlets to CommonJS, and while modules was the number one thing he wanted to get accomplished, we can see that we also got some promises in there. If you've ever done any jQuery work, any Ajax work, promises are a part of that. Now, promises, of course, are a spec that it's implemented in the browser. Up here, we're talking about implementing it on the server. But on the server, we can do promises, we can do file systems and modules and all that. But these implementations are what I wanted to take you in for. You'll see at the top of that middle column, we have Node.js. 2 down, we have Ringo.js. So what this means is we should expect similar capabilities out of Node and Ringo. And in fact, we will. What we have to realize, though, is that Node runs on top of V8, the Google JavaScript engine. Ringo runs on top of the JDK. But this notion of CommonJS should be helpful, because when you start seeing that MongoDB is a CommonJS server, when we see that CouchDB is a CommonJS server, we begin saying that I would expect similar capabilities and similar packages to be available across these different servers. So that's Ringo. And don't worry, we're going to come back and explore that in much greater detail. But no one gave me any grief about this at all. JavaScript on the JVM? Have any of you run JavaScript on the JVM before? Really? That's wonderful. What are you using? Do you have some existing scripts, or how are you using JavaScript on the JVM? Ah, very good. Okay, very nice, very nice. How are you using?
Yeah, the same thing, JDK 6 onwards.
If you haven't had a chance to hear him speak, he's a wonderful speaker. He popularized the phrase polyglot programming. Polyglot, of course, is Latin for many glots. No, it's Latin for many languages. And so being able to run Clojure on the JVM doesn't scare anyone. Being able to run Scala on the JVM doesn't scare anyone. Being able to run Groovy on the JVM doesn't make anyone look twice. But for some reason, JavaScript always makes someone do a double take. Whoa, what? Really? Yeah, really. So that's what we're going to talk about in here. You mentioned Rhino, which is the code name, the project name for Mozilla's JavaScript engine, the Firefox JavaScript engine. Now, what you have to realize is Rhino isn't running inside of Firefox, because Firefox is written in C, and SpiderMonkey was the name of their JavaScript engine written in C. Rhino is a port of that JavaScript engine to Java. Did you follow all that? Yeah. And as you mentioned, it's been shipping standard in the JDK since Java 6. Sun, now Oracle, has always recognized the power of running multiple languages on the JVM. As a matter of fact, did you know that even Java isn't a first-class citizen? You know the hotspot VM that we're running these days? Do you know what the hotspot VM was originally a virtual machine for? Scheme. Small talk. So what you're ending up with is a small talk virtual machine that Sun hired away. They acquired it, and they said, well, let's get Java running on it as well. Java isn't even a first-class citizen on the Java virtual machine. So that means it's incredibly easy for us to begin running Ruby on the JVM, and Python on the JVM, and Scala on the JVM. You can port existing languages to the JVM. You can have brand new languages running on the JVM. But JavaScript is one of those languages as well, and Sun has supported it since the 1.6 JDK. Now, I mentioned Nashorn. Nashorn, by the way, is German for Rhino. It should be helpful to remember it. But yeah, Nashorn, they say, is JavaScript's second chance. Well, some people may not have even given it a first chance. But what this article goes on to explain is that Rhino is based on a very early port of SpiderMonkey. And SpiderMonkey was written back in the mid-90s. And so it really is, almost 20 years old at this point. And when we talk about JavaScript being slow, it used to be slow. Back in the Netscape 2 days, back in the IE6 days, JavaScript was very slow. And part of it's slow because JavaScript is an interpreted language. But part of it is slow just because we hadn't done things like optimize those JavaScript engines. When Google released V8, that brought in a whole new era of JavaScript. We're actually in the third renaissance of JavaScript right now. The first renaissance was when Netscape 2 came out. All of a sudden we had a programming language in the browser. That was huge. The second renaissance was the Ajax revolution in 2005. Because what we were discovering then is JavaScript could be used for for applications like Gmail and Google Maps and Flickr and different things like that. But the third renaissance happened when Google first released Chrome, because it was the first major rewrite of a JavaScript engine. Because Microsoft and Netscape had that legacy code that they were carrying along for the ride all this time, Google came around and did a clean room, ground-up re-implementation of a JavaScript engine and started bringing in modern concepts like JIT compilation, just-in-time compilation, all kinds of optimizations. And V8 runs literally orders of magnitude faster than those 20th century JavaScript engines. So when we're looking at modern JavaScript engines like V8, like Nitro in Safari, those are world-class, incredibly fast JavaScript engines. So when Nashorn comes, it's basically a brand new ground-up rewrite, not of SpiderMonkey, but a brand new JavaScript engine that's certainly influenced by V8 and Nitro and all these other modern languages. But when this drops in Java 8, you're going to have a server that they claim just in early beta performance runs 5 times faster than the current Rhino implementation. And that's really before they've managed to do any kind of performance tuning on it at all. So JavaScript is not dead, not by any stretch. And when Java 8 hits, I haven't been tracking the betas, but I've heard that Nashorn has actually hit the Java 8 beta. It's in their mainstream right now. So if you go and download the latest beta version, you should get Nashorn. And in just a little bit, I'm going to show you some code where you can be sure that you are in fact running Nashorn. So that is the Java and JavaScript story. Now, we're not done by any stretch. We're going to spend a little bit more time exploring running Java and JavaScript together, calling Java from JavaScript, calling JavaScript from Java. We're going to do a lot with the scripting engine. If you've done any JSR 223 work, you'll feel right at home in here. Once we're comfortable with how that looks, we'll go in and we'll begin playing around with Ringo.js. It's a layer on top of those kinds of things. And then we'll wrap up talking about some of the modules and how CommonJS snaps back into that picture. But let's begin by talking about JavaScript on Java, actually running JavaScript on the JVM. So, as we mentioned, Rhino came out of Mozilla. It was a port, a Java port of the C-based SpiderMonkey. Now, what you have to realize, when we're running JavaScript on the JVM, it is converting them into classes. The one thing we can't do in the JDK is we can't see the bytecode that's created. In Groovy, you can. I can type in Groovy foo, and it'll run it interpreted, or I can type in Groovy C foo, and it'll compile it to bytecode so we can go in and take a look at the bytecode. That second thing isn't available to us in JavaScript. There is talk about adding that as a feature to Nashorn, and I would really like that, because then all of a sudden you can write out your JavaScript, compile it, and then see what the bytecode looks like. And being able to do bytecode manipulation is crucial for doing things like generating code coverage reports, doing any kind of AOP, aspect-oriented programming, everything else. So just know that this JavaScript that we're running is getting compiled into bytecode. The class that will result will look no different than it would if you had written it in Java. The only difference is we won't ever see that bytecode. It's all done in memory. Does that make sense? Yeah, good. All right. So here's our first example of running JavaScript on the JVM. One of the first things we're going to have to do is we're going to have to spin up a new script engine manager, and then we're going to have to get an engine out of that. Now, any of you who have been doing JSR 223 work know that this is how we could run Groovy code. This is how we could run JRuby code. What's nice about this scripting engine, about 223, is that it is a pluggable scripting engine. I want you to think of it more like JDBC. JDBC is an interface, but Java doesn't ship with any of the drivers standard. So you have to pull in the Oracle JDBC driver or the MySQL or the Postgres yourself. The scripting engine works much the same way. It's like the interface for this scripting engine, and then you can pull in individual scripting engines and manage them yourself. Now, since JDK 1.6 ships standard with JavaScript, you won't have to do anything special in order to get this engine name. Later on in this presentation, I'll show you how you can go out and pull in Nashorn. They've actually backported it to Java 7. Once you went in and grabbed that, you could then turn around and get that engine by name and bring it in. It would really essentially just be another jar on the class path that would give you the implementation that you needed. But as I said over and over and over and over and over again, JavaScript ships standard with 1.6. So once we get the engine manager, we're going to new up an engine. Once we have that engine, we can do all kinds of things. One of the things we can do is we can do an eval. And so there's the actual JavaScript that's being run, hello name. I like this example because the engine basically has this hash map. This hash map is called the context. And so right there, we're putting a name variable onto the context. And then the very next line down, we're reading that name out of the context. So this context is how we facilitate Java to JavaScript, JavaScript to Java communications. It's how we pass things back and forth. And I like this example because we're taking it one step further. I am reading in a name from the command line, pushing it onto the context or putting it onto the context, and then using it in JavaScript. So let's see this fella run. Source code. But what we really want to see, what? Oh. Someone ate my class path. I won't mention any names. But we see now being able to call Java. I'm executing JavaScript under the covers, and just to show you that's how this stuff works. Now, that's the simplest possible thing we can do. More than likely, what we're going to want to do is something a little bit more sophisticated. So once again, we'll new up a factory manager, we'll get JavaScript in there, but what we're going to eval this time isn't hard-coded text. What we're going to eval this time is whatever file we have in through arg sub 0. So isn't this cool? Literally 3 lines of code 6 if you include all of this stuff up there. But in 6 lines of code, what we have is the ability to run any arbitrary JavaScript on the JVM. So let me show you. I got some JavaScript that ends up looking like this. Yeah? So what I can do now is I can run eval file. Time of the morning it is in Denver, Colorado. I'm very tired right now. The only thing that's keeping me awake is the JavaScript and how exciting this is. So, what I'm saying right now is I sure could use some Gids coffee. And so now being able to come in here and do this. Now, what I want you to realize, and this might be why you're using Rhino in there, notice that the Java is compiled, but the JavaScript isn't. So this is an amazing strategy for being able to have compiled code up on your server running unchanged, but having pluggable algorithms that don't need to be compiled, that don't even need to worry about OSGI or any kind of class loading issues at all. Being able to hand in raw JavaScript gives you the ability to kind of have the best of both worlds. It allows you to treat Java as if it was an interpreted language. Now, it's not. It's JavaScript that's interpreted. But having that flexibility to call both is a huge win. That got us what we're looking for. The reality of the situation is you don't even need to write those 3 lines if you don't want to. That's how easy it is to run it inside of your app. And of course, those 3 lines could end up being in a servlet. You know, they could be end up being wherever you want them to be. Now, part of installing the JDK gives you the Java command to run your code and the Java C command to compile it, the Java P to go in and peruse your bytecode, but it also ships with JRun script. And JRun script is how you can go in and run that stuff just on your own. So when I go looking at Hi now, what I can do is I can say JRun script. Hi, and it executes like that. So you can see I'm even cutting out the middleman at this point. So you can start writing any utility script you want, any admin script you want in JavaScript, and just use JRun script instead of Java to execute that. Now, there's really an important thing that I want you to pick up on. This is a scripting language independent shell. Now, once again, I didn't specify anything. So by default, JavaScript is the language you're going to use. But you can do the same capability with any JSR 223 scripting language. You can do it with Groovy, you can do it with JRuby, you can do it with Jython, you can do it with any of those scripting languages. So even if you are not a JavaScript fan at the end of this talk, how could you not be? Even if you're not a JavaScript fan at the end, all you have to do is instead of getting the JavaScript engine, get another scripting engine. Get the Groovy scripting engine, the JRuby, whatever you want. When it comes to JRun script, if we get out to a command line, you can see this -L parameter is how you can control that from the command line. So if you did JRun script -L Groovy, you'd be able to run your Groovy code this way. Kind of nice. The other thing that's really nice is if you don't specify any arguments at all, Guess what? You're hanging out at a JavaScript prompt. Just laughing about this with Marty Hall on the drive back to the hotel the other night. He was saying, yeah, anytime I want to kind of play around with JavaScript, kind of just pick this up and then say, let's see here, 2 uppercase. Is that how it works? Yeah. You can see how I'm just kind of typing around in this. He says, I would normally do this in my browser. And, well, yeah, of course. You could do it in your browser. I do it too. Pop up that JavaScript console. Yeah? But the thing you have to realize is when I am running this JavaScript, I'm running it in the context of this page. So I could go in and get DOM objects, I could manipulate it, I could do whatever I want. The whole point of running this in the browser is you're running it in the context of that page. By just typing in jrun script, what you're doing is you're running it outside of the browser. And that means you can start doing all kinds of interesting things. This is the code. And by the way, this code will be on the GIDS website. You can also email me directly. I'm scott@thirstyhead.com, scott@thirstyhead.com. I'll get you this code as well. But this is really nice because this is what you can do to see what scripting engines you have in your system right now. So if I come back out to the command prompt once again, I can see that these are the 2 scripting languages that shipped standard with my version of Java on my version of the operating system. So I'll show you that source code again, but this shows me once again that I'm dealing with Mozilla Rhino and I'm dealing with the Apple script engine. So these are 2 possible scripting engines that you could deal with. This is what the code ends up looking like. Again, not a long bit of code at all. All I'm essentially going to do this time is new up a manager, but rather than asking for a specific engine, I am going to say, get me all of the engine factories, and I'm going to iterate through them one by one and ask it for the engine name and the version and the language and the extensions and so on and so forth. Helpful? Yeah. I think you will love running that script inside of Java, like we did that 3-liner, that eval. I mean, that's cool. But if you were limited to only JavaScript libraries, that would dramatically reduce the interest, the fun in doing that. Because we're running JavaScript on the JVM, we have access to all of the JavaScript package, the Java libraries and packages available to us. So anything I can do in Java, I can do in JavaScript as well. And this is why I make such a big deal about which engine we're running on. This code I'm about to show you won't run on Node.js because Node.js isn't running on the JDK, so you don't have access to any of the Java classes. This code I'm showing you won't run in Safari on the browser because, again, Safari is sandboxed away from those kinds of things. But if you run JavaScript on the JDK, you can import whatever you want. Now, this is the syntax we have to use, import package, for 2 reasons. First of all, import isn't a keyword in JavaScript yet. It will be in ECMAScript 6. We're running on ES5 right now. When ES6 kernel named reader, that just so happens to contain a Java buffered reader inside of it. once I'm there, I'm in JavaScript land, and JavaScript land, and Java land, and JavaScript land, and Java land. You see what I mean? Do you see how fun this is? Now, this is JavaScript. This is this read.js file. Yeah? So, if I were to jrun script read, yeah? But being able to mix your Java and your JavaScript is incredibly powerful, especially when it's in the same file, mixing that syntax around. And again, remember what we're dealing with now. You can then deal with all of those Java libraries that you would like, take that JavaScript file, have the engine run it in production. Is your mind being blown right now? Mine is, yeah. I'll say, yeah, let's do clap. Isn't that amazing? Yeah, it really is. So now I can start doing things like this. And this is me running it in my own code. This is my so being able to call Java from within JavaScript is an incredibly... The question is, can I begin overriding methods? Absolutely you can, yeah. So you can start doing all kinds of really interesting things because that reader there has a prototype. We're in JavaScript, so all of the JavaScript rules apply. So you can use prototype, you can override those functions, you can do whatever you want. Can you see how this might be really valuable for unit testing as well? Yeah, yeah. Now, how about the opposite? We were in JavaScript calling Java classes. How about the opposite now? We're in Java and we want to begin passing classes in. So just like we would do before, we're going to new up a script engine manager. We're going to get our JavaScript thing. That's a Java IO file, isn't it? I can tell because I didn't var f. I said file, f equals new. I can tell I'm in Java because of all the semicolons. Yeah? So this is truly a Java IO file. But remember the concept I was talking about before? I can push this on. And since you just saw that I can call Java from inside of JavaScript all day long, it shouldn't surprise us. Now, I'm just doing a simple eval at this point. But I am making a Java call from inside of JavaScript in order to do these kinds of things. So there is really zero impedance mismatch between the two. There are just a couple of weird edge cases that are well documented. Things where there are strings in Java and strings in JavaScript. You'll have to decide which kind you want. You'll have to be explicit in your JavaScript if you want a JavaScript string or a Java lang string. You'll have to be specific if you want a Java integer or a JavaScript number. You'll have to be explicit if you want a Java array or a JavaScript array. But as I said, there are just a couple of weird edge cases where there's overlap not only in the class, but more importantly, the class name, where you'd have to do a fully qualified class name in order to make sure you don't accidentally step on everyone's toes. If you want to learn more about this, Oracle has an entire scripting guide based on this. Now, the good news is, since JavaScript is the engine that ships standard with 1.6, JavaScript, what? Let's try that again. There we go. Since JavaScript is the language that ships standard, all of their examples are going to use JavaScript working through here. So that works to your benefit as well. If you go into the Java 6 Java docs, there's a whole programmer guide dedicated just to scripting. I have never found the need to upgrade Rhino because a lot of times what we're dealing with simple scripts. These aren't really production caliber things. But remember what we said, Nashorn's goal is to implement a high performance JavaScript runtime. ECMAScript, they mention it here, they mention it somewhere else. They want to bring us an ECMAScript 5 feature in. Rhino, as it stands right now in JDK 1.6, gives us ECMAScript 3 capabilities. And ES3 is basically what's shipping in Internet Explorer 6. So Rhino is a last century implementation. If you wanted to start doing ES5 kinds of things, and certainly ES6 and things like that, that might be a compelling reason to upgrade to Nashorn. And if you want to begin playing around with it, Google Nashorn backport, and you'll get links to a project that actually allows you to download this source code, compile it, and include it in Java 7. Now, you can't take it all the way back to Java 6, unfortunately. But Java 6 is officially out of the support lifecycle for Oracle anyway, so Oracle isn't going to give you the capability to add new features to what's essentially a deprecated version of the language. But using this Nashorn backport, you could begin playing around with these kinds of things. They'll say all over the place, this isn't production quality, this isn't production quality. Yeah, eventually it will be. Right now, this would be more for you to experiment with these kinds of things. So we've spent a long time not talking about Ringo. We can get back to Ringo now, and now that we revisit this, we see that Ringo is a CommonJS based. Oh, good. That now lets me know that I should expect to see the same base libraries included in Ringo as I can in Node.js, as I can in MongoDB, as I can in CouchDB, as I can in Narwhal, as I can in a bunch of other libraries out there. So that helps us understand that much. It's a JavaScript runtime written in Java based on the Rhino JavaScript engine. Now we have all the pieces in place. We can push forward and begin exploring Ringo. So let's do that. As long as you're on Java 6 or higher, you don't have to do anything special with Java. It isn't tied to any particular version of Java. And when you do the download and the installation, it is like installing any other Java project you have experience with. So when I come in here right now and take a look at my bash profile, and I look for, Ringo, is there anything there that scares you? Shouldn't. Download the Ringo project. It's a zip. It's a tarball. You'll unzip it wherever you want. You'll add Ringo home as a variable. You'll add Ringo home bin to your path. And once you do all that, all of a sudden, command prompt. Ringo. Won't be able to do that. Let's see here. Yeah? I haven't done anything but add one more layer of introspection on there. The Ringo has a nice REPL on there, but we already know that the Ringo REPL is basically just shelling out to that JRun script under the covers. We now know all of the underlying technology, but Ringo brings some very interesting capabilities to the party. One of the things you can begin doing is something like this. Now, those of you who were in my last class, the Node.js class, start recognizing this require keyword. If you want to bring in Java packages, you'll use import packages, that magic method up there. If you want to start bringing in CommonJS modules, you'll start using the require keyword. And that require keyword is the same as it would be in Node.js, is the same as it would be in CouchDB, is the same as it would be in MongoDB. So you begin seeing now that I've got all of the Java capabilities available to me, as well as all of the CommonJS capabilities. So if I'm hanging out here right now, and I get into the Ringo REPL, and I say equals require file system. So far, so good. And then I turn around and I open up the file. Yeah? And then I go ahead and print it out. Now, I could be doing this through Java as well by bringing that in as a Java file object and then getting a buffered input reader and reading off of that. And so once again, we're really in this interesting ground. Some people would feel uncomfortable about this, saying, well, I'll just do the Java stuff. But what you have to realize is if you find a bunch of Node.js code that you wanted to kind of play around with a little bit, you could bring in that Node.js code and execute it. Or if you had a bunch of Java code laying around, you could bring in that Java code and execute it. And you can do both in the same file. You can begin mixing in your CommonJS modules with your Java packages and really get the best of both worlds. Yeah? You know, it's a very good question. Which one would I recommend in terms of performance? I haven't gone in and done any benchmarking on these kinds of things. I will tell you that since I'm running Rhino, I would almost guarantee you that either one of them are going to run equally slow because of the JavaScript environment that we are in. So that would be more of a concern than what implementation is better. A real interesting question would be for us to begin writing some micro benchmarks after we bring in Nashorn and see what a modern JavaScript engine, because what you have to realize, Nashorn is going to include Java 7 features like invoke dynamic and all of those kinds of optimizations. So if we brought in Nashorn and did that, and then brought in just regular Java and did that, that would be a more valid A/B test. And I'd probably want to do at least an A/B/C test. I'd want to use Java using a file I/O. I'd want to use JavaScript using a file I/O. And then I'd want to use a JavaScript using a CommonJS and figure out which one of those would give me the best performance. This is a good question. Can I use Requirejs as a module loader? Unfortunately, no. Because Requirejs uses AMD by default, and we are in a CommonJS module loader. So really, you're not going to be able to use Requirejs in this context. What we're dealing with is almost a peer or a replacement for Requirejs. But Requirejs is what you would use to load up AMD modules in your browser. Since we're outside of the browser, since we're in server-side land, we're using CommonJS to do those kinds of things. Is that fair? Yeah. All right. Was bringing up a simple server, having it list on a port and return something. This is the equivalent in Ringo. This is the equivalent of bringing up a file server, a web server, excuse me. Now that web server is always going to return 200 and it's simply going to say hello world. Of course, we would want to expand this out, but what this means let me get out of my Rhino directory and into my Ringo directory. Here we go. So what this means now is, boom, I have a server up and running, a web server up and running. But notice what it's running inside of. Jetty. We are on the JDK using this particular web server, but now when I come out and start looking at localhost 8080, I'll get a hello world out of that. Or if I come in and make a quick change to it, hello Gids world. And notice that I didn't have to reboot the server or anything. Since JavaScript is interpreted, I can keep this thing up and running. I might be tempted, now I do this in Groovy typically instead of JavaScript, but I might be tempted to do my initial prototyping in something like JavaScript, since you could see I could type it and run it, type it and run it, type it and run it, and kind of go back and forth. And once I'm sure everything is cool in the REPL or in this live server, then I could turn around and take it out and compile it. That would be more for production, for performance, for those kinds of reasons. But I can use this as a debug tool to very quickly evaluate code and see what it can do. But spinning up a web server in half a dozen lines of code is awful fun. Now Ringo can take this one step further. What we're beginning to get into now is more a Rails or a Grails type capability of being able to go in and scaffold out a brand new app. In order to do that, I'm not going to use the Ringo command. I'm going to use the Ringo admin command. So if I wanted to, I could come in here right now and I could say Ringo admin test. Oh, Ringo admin create test. Gave away my punchline. You can see what else Ringo admin allows you to do. It allows you to go out and download and install new modules. But if I come in here and do a test right now, we can see that what it did for me is it scaffolded out a whole new directory. It scaffolded out a whole new application for me. So here's my test server right here. If I come in and take a look at main, we can see what it's going to do. It's going to bring in my actions template. This is my actions template. Anyone who was in my any of my talks previously know that we're all about the exports, aren't we? So this is going to export index. That's going to allow me to reach out and get templates, index.html. Notice I'm reaching out to the file system right here. I'm returning a mustache template with this thing rendered. Mustache, yeah, is the same JavaScript templating library you would use otherwise. But this is my main.js now, saying that, all right, when a request comes in, if it's one of my actions, go ahead and look in actions. If it's just a simple file, go ahead and serve up that simple file. Otherwise, give me a 404. So all I did was type in Ringo admin create test. Now I'm going to type in Ringo main, I got a server up and running. But now all of a sudden, I get something that looks like this. And if I end up looking for a file like test.html, well, yeah, I get a 404. But if I come over here and begin looking, remember in this public directory right here, I could come in and create a test.html. And now all of a sudden, I'm serving up that page. So the speed at which we're able to spin these things up is just compelling. Being able to come in and do a Ringo admin create and then just simply execute main takes care of all of that templating, all of that boilerplatey kind of stuff. Now, I told you as well that Ringo admin can be used to go out and install new packages. Now, these packages follow this CommonJS spec. The one thing that I get asked all the time is, can I use Ringo to run Node modules? Unfortunately, no. Unfortunately, no. I can't use Ringo to run Node modules. And the answer is almost in the question, isn't it? Because we're on different platforms, because one's based on V8 and one's based on Java, and one allows you to make Java calls and one doesn't, blah, 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 you won't be able to do that kind of stuff. What I will tell you, though, is there a project out there called Node.jar. And what you'll see Node.jar is, it's currently kind of a skunkworks project inside of Oracle. You can't get your hands on it yet. But I would anticipate that maybe when Nashorn ships, it might ship with Node.jar as well. Because Oracle has really been quick to demo it when they're demoing Nashorn. If you do get an opportunity to see any Oracle employees demo this, the whole point is, wouldn't it be great if we could turn around and run all those NPM modules on Nashorn, by extension on Ringo as well. So that is definitely on the development path. Not code that we can get our hands on right now, but certainly code that they feel comfortable enough demoing in front of a live audience. So that's promising, at least, that it might ship when Nashorn ships. So here's our good friend package.json once again. We've said that you gotta have package.json if you're a CommonJS compliant. Package.json is a text file, a JSON file, that has all of our dependencies in it, our name, our version number, our repo, our bug tracker, all those things. But the dependency is the most important thing. Being able to solve those transitive dependencies. Being able to type in npm install foo and have it pull down all your dependencies. That's a feature of CommonJS. So that means being able to type in Ringo admin install foo will follow all those same conventions and have all the same behavior. So there are far fewer Ringo modules out there than there are NPM modules, but you can go and take a look. And there are things like MongoDB drivers and CoffeeScript compilers and good things like that. And the way we would go about installing these kinds of things is by doing a Ringo admin install. Now, you can install from any arbitrary URL. Since there aren't many Ringo modules out, you're almost certainly going to be installing from a local URL or even a file system. But you can turn around and just do a Ringo install. And if you just pass in a format that looks like this is going to go out by default and look on GitHub. This is the username, that is the repo name. So it'll reach out and download those things for you auto-magically. We're real close to the end. Ringo admin was the old way of doing things. They've actually come up with a new way, RP. And RP is actually preferred to Ringo admin, but ironically, in 0.9, which is the current drop of Ringo, you have to use Ringo admin to install RP. So you got a little bit of a chicken and egg problem right there. But once you use Ringo admin to install RP, moving forward, this is what you'll want to end up doing. Because once you've got it installed, you can turn around and you can use it to you can create a user, you can list all of your installed packages. This represents a huge improvement in the capabilities of what it does. What I like doing is typing in RP search. And this allows you to say, all right, RP search Mongo, or RP search coffee, or RP search things like that. But if you don't provide any query terms at all, it'll just from the command line give you a list of all the different packages. Like I said, there are only about a dozen to 15 right now, so we're very early stages. I'm anticipating a huge upswing in interest in Ringo once we have a modern JavaScript library associated with us. I think that once Nashorn comes up, you're going to start seeing a lot of movement in this space, especially if they ship it with Node.jar. Yeah? Do we have any kind of IDE plugin for it at this point? No, we don't. That's a question that was coming up. I'd use any standard JavaScript IDE that you'd use if you're an IntelliJ user. I've used it with this. If you're an Eclipse user, as long as you've got good JavaScript support. There's another nice web browser or IDE out there called WebStorm that I've used. It's made by IntelliJ, but it's just skinny down to just JavaScript. So you can do that kind of thing as well. So, in addition to all of those third-party libraries, there are a number of built-in modules. That's all a part of the Ringo documentation as well. You could spend time reading up on those. We covered a lot of ground here, but I hope it was enlightening. I hope it's opened your eyes to the idea of being a polyglot programmer and the real value proposition associated with it. Java is a brilliant language. I love Java. I also love Groovy. I also love JavaScript. And what a sophisticated developer will be able to do is use each one to its strengths. And if you can use all of them on a project, not just because you can, but because you're using the right tool for the job, that's a real sign of sophistication. Did you have a good time? I did. This is my last talk of the conference. I love coming to GIDS. I love coming to Bangalore. I will see you back for the Mobile Developer Summit. I'll be up in Pune at the, what's that conference called? Is it called Flash? It's called, no, not Flash. It's called Fluid. Fluid is what it's called, yeah. So I'll be back up in Pune at Fluid. I'll be back here in the fall talking about at the Mobile Summit, and I'll definitely be back next year at GIDS. So thank you so much for your time and attention. I really do appreciate it.